The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Katie Cook with ISAC, and before we get started, I would just like to note that you can send in any questions you may have through the chat feature, and they will be addressed at the first half of the presentation and again after the second half. I am now pleased to introduce our two presenters today, Iowa Flood Center Director Witold Krajewski and Associate Director Nathan Young. Dr. Krajewski is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Iowa College of Engineering and has served as director of the Iowa Flood Center for the past 11 years since its founding. Our second presenter, Nathan Young, is the associate director of the Iowa Flood Center and a research engineer at the University of Iowa's IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering Department. I would like to thank you both for being here today. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Krajewski. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. It is a pleasure to present our work to all of you watching and listening. I'm here with Nathan Young, my colleague at the Flood Center, and we will present, to you our work, which is all for you. Well, I'm starting with this opening slide showing our home, the building of the Institute on campus of the University of Iowa and also on the banks of Iowa River. Normally, I would be sitting on the top floor of this, building, but instead, I'm in the basement of my house. Hopefully, the network connection is good enough, and I hope you will enjoy the presentation. So we started as a state-appointed flood center in 2009, following the devastating flood of 2008. And it was in recognition of the expertise that we had at the University of Iowa in that building that I was, showing you. In river mechanics and hydraulics and all things fluids, including hydrology and floods. So when the state legislators called us to action, it was to help the people of Iowa to deal with floods. And we have developed a number of technologies that I will share with you. Unfortunately, all these technologies still cannot mitigate events like this one. So this is just last year, spring, the Missouri River corridor, another devastating event. Well, this is the exact language of the bill that appointed us. I just highlighted a few keywords, here. So this is part of our charge, forecasting floods, mapping possible inundation, improving the monitoring of floods, and of course, developing the next generation of experts for the state and the nation. Well, so ever since we were appointed, we went to work and we started satisfying those charges. So we deployed about 250 bridge sensors. Actually, I'll come back, to that. So these are small devices, totally developed in-house from the concept to the deployment. They measure the distance from the bridge to the water table, and as that water goes up and down, the devices can track those changes, sense the distance, and send the data to our computers from where anybody who is equipped with internet and computer software can access the data without any difficulty. So this is one of these, sensors in action during a flood event somewhere in northern Iowa a couple of years ago. when we compare the data with a collocated stream gauge from the United States Geological Survey. You know, this is what you see. So basically you see not two lines, but one line. So the two sensors agree pretty well. Well, this is how the data may look like. This is actually from a real event. This is from the summer of 2018, a flash flood in Des Moines, 4 Mile Creek, for those of you who are familiar with that location. So here I'm showing you not only to demonstrate a cartoonish representation of the data, but also the fact that in this particular case, there was a very, very quick rise of the waters in that small creek. Normally it's small, it got pretty big. One person got killed. And then there was an interruption in the data service because the bridge got submerged and the sensor got submerged. But when the water went down, the transmission of the data resumed without any intervention by us. So this is just a testament to the good engineering that we have deployed, you know, here. So this is the entire, you know, state. So I'm showing 3 sets of sensors, locations. The green ones, this is from USGS. So those are the official stream gauges operated by this federal agency. The blue squares are the locations of the Iowa Flood Center. So I mentioned 250 if you were to count. And then the red ones. And the red ones are the ones that communities from all over the state, perhaps your county as well, requested, you know, from us. So we were surprised to get such a high number of responses. And I'm happy to report that to date, from 100, we already deployed about 30. Well, to build them and to deploy them takes funding. In this particular, you know, case, the agency that sponsored those 30 that we already deployed this summer, that's the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. We keep looking for money to deploy, you know, the rest. We work closely with the National Weather Service, which is, and also the Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Those are the 2 agencies that know where such data are needed, you know, most. So this work in progress, but I'm happy to report that we increased this network of sensors. So now another piece of information. So some of you perhaps remember my talk last summer in 2019 at the same conference. This was in person. And at that time, I communicated to you that we are sending data through modems, cell phone modems. The operator that we use is Verizon, and Verizon had the plans to sunset the currently used technology, the so-called 3G. And you all heard about the transition to 5G. Well, so for 5G or even for 4G, the modems that sit in all those sensors are obsolete. So we had a huge task this summer to update many of these modems into a new generation of modems that can handle this communication. We are about halfway done, and the funding for this comes from Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and we are all very thankful to the department for that. Well, so this was one big project, and this was responding to the charge of improving the monitoring of floods in the state. Of course, monitoring stream flow in streams and rivers, so that the value of that goes beyond just floods. Actually, we are in an extensive drought, and again we have a confirmation of that from our sensors as well. But a second big undertaking by the Iowa Flood Center was developing maps of potential inundation. So there are two sets of these maps, one for communities. These are more detailed maps developed with a higher level modeling technology. This is how they look like. I will not spend a lot of time on this because my colleague Nathan will take you to the live system and will show you how to find those maps and how to navigate the interface. But clearly we are in a Google Map environment and one can very easily find their home, business, school, whatever point of interest, and see if it is in a flood zone or not. There is more information available. One can inquire for the depth of the water in a particular location, and also we show the number of structures that potentially would be affected by a given inundation. So it's not only the locations, but also the value of the potential damage. So this is clearly something very useful for the people who have formal responsibility for public safety, but also for flood mitigation and management and so forth. So the people who are in a position of decision making. This is a map showing all the locations where we have developed or are developing these detailed community maps. So one requirement for these maps is that there is a USGS stream gauge, there. So by tying those maps to the stream gauge, we can also incorporate these maps in forecasting. So when the National Weather Service makes a stream flow forecast, and that forecast happens to be for the amount of stream flow that may cause flooding, well, one can explore the associated map of that flooding. So that is an added bonus here. But the big project actually led by my colleague Nathan is on statewide mapping. So this is for the entire state. Actually for 85 counties that were eligible following the big flood of 2008. So this project is nearly, well, pretty much, complete. Again, Nathan can tell you a little bit more about the current, status. But officially the project has ended, and I will just walk you just very quickly through the major phases of this, project. So the first phase, we refer to it as hydrography. It was just digitizing the locations of streams and rivers, and of course, the big ones, everybody knows where those are, but there are many smaller, streams that we had to develop locations, for, and digital representation. So we were fortunate here to work with LiDAR-based topography data. So the state of Iowa, even before the flood of 2008, had the wisdom to acquire LiDAR-based topography data. So that's like having elevation every 3 feet. So that's and you can see here. So this is not a photograph. This is just plotting the elevation. So you can see the tremendous level of detail that you see in the landscape, including those small waterways. And then we also digitize the banks of the bigger streams and rivers. So that's a digital infrastructure, if you will, that is necessary to do the inundation, mapping. The second, phase is we call it hydrology, and this is to determine what is the amount of water that may be flowing in a given location with a certain probability. And so, of course, this is not an easy question, to answer. So the way it is done is following a methodology developed by interagency committee, and kind of the host of that committee is USGS, because they maintain data, that they operate these stream gauges, and they have the records of stream gauge data in some locations going back as far as 100 years. Unfortunately, for most locations, the records are much shorter. And then based on these records, one has to determine what is the chance that river discharge at such and such location could be with a certain probability. And so this is what this methodology does. I have to say here that there is a large uncertainty, there associated with those, estimates. Nevertheless, we follow the standard methodology. This is the methodology that is used by the engineering community and also by the regional planners. So this is following, the standards. Still, despite the fact that those are national standards, the uncertainty is not going away. So there is a considerable uncertainty associated with this, and of course, this uncertainty then propagates all the way to the maps. So the next, phase is building a model, a mathematical model that describes, that mimics how water flows. And if a channel that we found from this first phase, if that channel can accommodate that amount of water, then there's no problem. If the amount of water that corresponds to certain probability is too much for the channel, well, then you have the inundation, and it is the hydraulic model that tells us about this. So then the last phase is basically just intersecting the water elevation given from the model with the terrain, and this is how you get the map. So Nate will take you live to those maps. I'm just showing them here. So just a statewide view. You can easily navigate them and zoom in into an arbitrary location. You can even zoom in further, and you see those maps. So now we show these maps for context only. So this is not a forecasting, this is not a prediction. This is just showing people everywhere in Iowa what could happen. And we associate some chances for different levels of possible flooding. But this is just for context, and again, Nate will tell you what to do if you have to take some formal action, for example, obtain a development permit. We also make forecasts, Streamflow Forecast. So this is what the National Weather Service does, but they don't do it everywhere. And they don't do it all the time. So they are building a model that would allow them to do just that. However, we, for Iowa, already have a model like that. So this is a little bit, technical, so I don't want to spend too much, time, but I will just, say that our model accounts for the translation of rainfall into runoff, and accounting for infiltration of water into the soil, accounting for evapotranspiration, which is a combination of evaporation of water from the surface right after rain, and also transpiration by the vegetation. So we account for all of that. The rainfall comes from radar data. I'll show you in a moment. And then the water goes into the nearest, stream, and then little streams come together and make bigger streams, and the bigger streams make little rivers, and and so it goes all the way to the Mississippi. And then from the mathematical point of view, one can describe all these processes that I just talked about into a system of equations that one can, solve. And if you solve it, there are many, as you can see. If you solve it, then you can make a forecast of how much water will be flowing in the next, maybe hours to maybe 5-6, days. It's easier to make this forecast for large rivers where the water is already flowing. It's much more difficult to make it for very small streams because then everything depends on the quality of the rainfall forecast that you may obtain. So there are 7 radars that look over us here in Iowa, and they provide data that we mapped into rainfall intensity. And we show in our Iowa flood information system that Nathan will walk you through. So we show those maps of rainfall with 5-minute time steps, so you can see how storms move across. Right now, I don't think there is any precipitation anywhere in the state, certainly not here in Iowa City. This is what you would see if there was, a storm. And those are the 7 radars that look over us. Some are located in the state, some just outside of the state. We solve this system of equations, this 2 million of equations. We solve them using fast, computers, and then we share the results with all of you through this Iowa flood information system. Now I have to, before I move on to the next topic, I have to say that we have developed understanding with the National Weather Service to not confuse the public. So for those locations and those times when they have a stream flow forecast, we don't show our forecast. So there is only one forecast. But for all those locations and the thousands of communities that we have in Iowa that are located by streams and rivers, and we have the forecast, we show that forecast. Sometimes that forecast is difficult to show in a quantitative way, because if there is no stream gauge or if there is no Iowa Flood Center bridge sensor, then it's very difficult to communicate that information. So we have developed a kind of a flood potential index, and we just show that index, and it has just a few values, like low potential, average potential, watch out, and then high potential. So that's what we do. So all that information from the sensors, from the maps, from the forecasting system comes into this Iowa flood information system. Again, Nathan will walk you through the system. This is just a quick, glimpse into rainfall. You know that rainfall that is relevant to flooding may not be the rainfall that just stopped. But it may be something that happened, 2 or 3 days earlier. This is the green dots are the communities that I mentioned. So we have about 1,000 communities that are by streams and rivers. And again, with the current technology, the National Weather Service is not in a position to give quantitative forecasts for all those locations, but the Flood Center does. This is an example of that flood potential index, here. So unfortunately, Nathan will not be able to show you anything like this in the system because there is nothing going on. It's quite the opposite. But when there is a lot of water flowing in all these little, streams and rivers, then this is how that flood potential looks like. So you can look at it from the river network, point of view for a given community of interest. So somebody who made this slide, probably myself, clicked on this little community, there, got an outline of the watershed upstream, that this is where that water is coming, from. And then this display shows this in a bigger, context. There is a time control for the user of this, so one can go backwards in time and look how things, developed hour by hour, or one can look forward in time and look at the forecast of what is coming, their way. This is just another quick shot. Again, this is from about a year ago. There is nothing like that happening, right now in the state. So our activities got a lot of publicity all over, the place. So we have actually some updated, views for IFAS. We develop additional, technologies. So some of the data that are present in the system are connected to home assistants. So some of you perhaps have, so what's her name? This different, so Google can assist you, or Siri, or other smart assistants. So our system interacts with those, systems. It's more in a prototype, level, but the technology, exists, and we will be implementing it on a wide scale. So here we go. So Google Assistant or Cortana or others. Alexa, famous Alexa, right? So, and Alexa wouldn't know anything about floods without the Iowa Flood Center, because Alexa is not that smart. Alexa is only as smart as we allow her to be. So, that's how it works. Now we have an extensive outreach, program, here in the state. So probably many of you heard about the Iowa watershed approach. So many communities from these watersheds that I'm showing here know very well about, this. The state got almost $100 million from Housing and Urban Development, Agency, and spending very significant, most of that money to build projects like here in the picture, below. We also, I have to brag a little bit, but bragging is in. So we got some awards. So we made it the cover of a trade magazine. So this is the bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. We got awards from national organizations, like, for example, National Hydrologic Warning, Council. So this is exactly for that flood information system that Nathan will show you. We got an award for the bridge sensors from the Association of State Floodplain, Managers. So the list goes on and on. So actually, our friends from South Dakota, that they were, smart enough, and they saw IFAS and they said, oh, we would like to have something like that too. And they came, to us, and we helped them, build a similar, system, not quite like for Iowa, but similar, only for one basin, Big Sioux River. But that Big Sioux River, as some of you know, flows into Iowa. We get visitors from all over the place. There's a large group of people from North Carolina, and they were interested in our resiliency activities, building resiliency for the people of Iowa. We had another big group coming from Texas. So what is special about this is twofold. So first, that they came in January. So if anybody from Texas comes to Iowa in January, they are brave, or they really want something. Well, they really wanted something because they said Texas got money to spend on flood mitigation, right? So we all know about the Hurricane Harvey, and every couple of weeks there is another hurricane going to Texas, so they got a problem, but they also got money. So they realized that they don't want to waste that money, and they came here to Iowa to learn from us, spend a couple of days, with us. We walked them through everything, that we do, and they were back home, happy. So just a few shots from our activities all over the place. We also provide technical assistance, so some pilot projects for urban flooding. So that's a little bit a different animal from the modeling point of view. You have to account for the subsurface infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, here shown in red. So this is for the town of Manchester. We also can react, quickly. So this helicopter does not belong to the flood center. But this helicopter belongs to the College of Engineering at the University of Iowa, and the two ladies in the middle work for the National Weather Service, and they wanted to look at some flooding in the eastern part of the state and update the flood levels that they communicate in their systems, that we also communicate in the Iowa Flood Information System. So we quickly arranged for a quick trip, and here it goes. So we could see some inundation that normally, some water that is normally not there. So now, in recognition of the expertise that we have following that disaster on the Missouri last year, 2019, together with a number of partners, Iowa Economic Development Authority, with funding from the federal government, from the Department of Commerce, we are developing flood information system for the Missouri River, corridor. And what is special about, this, and also the big river on the other side, is that originally the flood center, we didn't get involved, there on the Missouri and the Mississippi, because the federal government already spends billions managing those rivers, and we didn't think that with the little funding that we receive from the state that we could really contribute. Well, it turns out that we can, and so this is a project that again includes many partners, state and federal, and other organizations, consultants, and so forth, and hopefully in a year or so, we will be able to provide some guidance to the people there, both from the planning perspective as well as from just the everyday flood warning, perspective for the people who live there. So we are popular with the media, so sometimes these maps that Nathan will show you, they show on the evening, news. We get visitors, this National, Guard, here visiting the flood center a couple of years ago. Even kids like what we do, and they like to play with some of the educational tools that we develop. So we are, very happy being able to do for Iowans, what we do. It's very satisfying being able to put our expertise into a very concrete help to many of you out there. We couldn't do this without our partners, so probably I'm forgetting, somebody, so my apologies. But you can still see a number of logos of the partners that we value a lot. We fully trust each other. We come to each other for help. We try to leverage each other's, expertise. So overall, it has been a very good story from the beautiful Iowa, and that's all, from me for now, for today. Hopefully next year we'll be able to see each other in person. But I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you very much.
I don't see any questions at this time. If you're ready to switch over to Nathan's presentation, I can go ahead and do that.
I'm ready.
Sure, that sounds good. Let's see. I'm not familiar with the interface, so forgive my confusion here.
No problem. Do you see the share your screen?
I do, yeah. Let's see. Can you see my screen yet?
Not yet. You might have to click the arrow. There you go. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as Vitek mentioned, we share all of our tools and resources through the Iowa Flood Information System. You can reach this at ifas.iowafloodcenter.org, or just simply Googling IFAS will be the first hit. And when you first enter the system, you'll see the splash page. There's a general launch button that brings you into the default interface. There are a few shortcuts if you're interested in specific pieces of information like inundation maps, stream conditions, or conditions for specific communities. There's also access to text alerts for different water levels at our river gauges, a video guide for IFAS, a widget that you can download, and then several different pieces of information, just sharing some tutorials, some resources you can download, and our web service. So if you have your own website where you want to show our data in maybe a different format, you can go out and retrieve our data and present it however you'd like. But today I'm going to focus on just the default interface. So I'm going to click on the Launch IFAS button, and hopefully this will load fairly quickly. So it turns out we do have a little bit of rainfall in the state. So I do have something to show. So the default is when you launch IFAS is to show the current rainfall and any flood alerts that are ongoing in the state. As most of you know, we're in a drought condition, so not a lot of flood alerts happening. But down in the lower right-hand corner, you can animate the rainfall over the past 6 hours. So you can see that rainfall happening over the state. This is the radar rainfall that Vitek mentioned when he was talking about our hydrologic model. So this is a rainfall product that we create from the NextRad data. So it's not just a color showing the relative rainfall intensity, but there's actually numbers associated with it. So each one of those pixels has a rainfall intensity that we can use to drive our hydrologic model and make our forecasts. Over on the right-hand side is where you'll find all of the different options. The first lets you look at an Iowa overview, which is kind of the default view we're in. You can look for communities. You can have it display information relevant to your location. I'm going to come back to this in a little bit. We'll look at one specific community, but I wanted to show you some of the other resources first. We have flood conditions, so flood watches and advisories from the National Weather Service. Of course, there's nothing to see. Flood alerts. So those would be from our Iowa Flood Center flood alerts. The National Weather Service forecast information, flood potential with rain, without rain, because we don't really have a high confidence in exactly where it's going to rain based on the forecast. We try to bound the problem by showing a with forecast scenario, a without rain scenario, and then something that's a bit extreme where we have 2 inches of rain everywhere in the state at the same time. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what the possibilities could be. This is where you can access all the different data resources. So I'll show you the stream gauges VTech mentioned. Let's shut off this rainfall. So these are all, again, the USGS gauges in the state in green. So we can click on one of those, and we're receiving all the USGS information at that location from their servers. You can see that we show the watershed boundary. So all the rainfall that falls within this boundary eventually makes its way down to along the Iowa River and Lone Tree. And if you get a snapshot of what's happening over the past couple days, if you click more info, excuse me, then you can go back about 2 weeks and look at what has happened over the past 2 weeks. We have this cartoonish view of the river, as VTech calls it, that shows you the current, and under flood conditions, the Weather Service will be making a forecast here. We'd have forecasted information, and that's relative to the different flood alert levels that the Weather Service issues. So action stage, minor flooding, moderate flooding, and major flood conditions. And so during a flood event, you can see this water level reaching up into those flood categories. If you want more information than what we've shown here, you can go out to the National Weather Service or the USGS page through these links, and that will give you all the information that each of those agencies either collects or forecasts for that location. Very similar information for the Iowa Flood Center locations. So I'll just pick one here. So this is the Skunk River at Brighton. Again, we've got a snapshot view and then more detailed information. Here we're showing the Iowa Flood Center forecast based on our hydrologic models. And then we've got our 3 different scenarios. So this one is based on the rainfall forecast. This one was based on no rain, which I believe under these conditions is the same. And then this one is based on that 2-inch rainfall scenario. And again, there's very little response just because the ground is so dry right now. Even if we had a 2-inch rain in this basin, there'd be very little response on the river. Other data resources we have, rain gauges. So we have rain gauges that we deploy ourselves, but we've also displayed a number of different rain gauges distributed throughout the state from other organizations. You can click on any one of these, and again, because it's so dry, there's not much to show. Actually, let's look a little further north. And we can see the event that happened today, at least, at this rain gauge, but you can go back several weeks. So we got the daily total in light blue, and then the hourly totals in dark blue. We also show data for the Corps of Engineers reservoirs in the state, which there are 4. 3 actually provide data that we can use. I'll show Coralville Reservoir here near Iowa City. Again, we show a cartoonish view. You can go back about 2 weeks, and you can see as you move the cursor the change in outflow from the reservoir through time. And then in this cartoonish area to the left, the water level should go up and down. The Corps has been doing a good job apparently of maintaining that water level by releasing different amounts of water, but you can see it varies a little bit with time. And then this is the forecast information from the Weather Service and the Corps of Engineers. We also show shallow groundwater information. This is data that we at the Flood Center collect. Just show this example. So we have soil information. So this is soil in the first 20 or so inches of the soil profile at 4 locations, 2 inches, 4 inches, 8 inches, and 20 inches. We show the soil temperature and the soil moisture. Again, 14 to 18% is fairly low. And then up here we also show the rainfall data. So it's neat when you see a heavy rainfall event, you can actually watch in this interface the water trickle down through the soil profile as it infiltrates. This is also good information for us, having that temperature profile, so we know whether the ground is frozen, and that helps in making our rainfall runoff estimates. We also at these locations have shallow groundwater wells, so this is a little bit deeper water down in the aquifer, and you can look at those water levels. They respond fairly slowly in most cases to rainfall events and dry out very slowly, but you can monitor those conditions as well. Those are more useful for monitoring drought. And then at these locations, we also have what we call we call them hydrometeorological stations because they're monitoring rain, soil, the shallow groundwater, and wind. So we've got wind direction, speed, and gusts at each one of these locations. VTech mentioned all of the river communities for which we make forecasts. So these are all of the communities in the state that are adjacent to rivers and streams and subject to flood risks. So if we click on one of those, it gives you the flood potential outlook. This happens to be Chelsea along the Iowa River. The potential outlook is just a color scheme. So green being low, yellow and orange being moderate to high, and then red being extremely high. So that gives the communities at least a qualitative snapshot of their flood risk over the next few days, so they can make plans and respond. And I will, so the multi-sensor view I think is interesting. So I'm going to come back up to river communities, and just because I'm in Iowa City, I'm going to choose Iowa City and the Iowa River. And it's going to show me the watershed on the Iowa River that drains to Iowa City. And then you can turn on turn on the stream gauges, and now it's only showing the stream gauges in the watershed. So only the information that's relevant to my community. And then you can also turn on the multi-sensor view, and that labels each sensor with a number, and then shows all the water levels at each one of the sensors. And you just hover your cursor over each one, and it will bring it up to the top of the menu and highlight it. So you can track the flow of water down through the watershed. That's a very useful tool during an event. So we'll close that out. There it is. And I'm going to go back to the Iowa overview. The next piece of information is the thing that I'm most involved in. So these are the flood maps that VTech mentioned. The first being the community flood maps. So we have flood maps for about 25 or so communities currently, and we're always adding more. And a good example usually is Cedar Rapids. As VTech mentioned, these are always situated near USGS stream gauges because the National Weather Service makes forecasts at these locations. And our experience in the 2008 flood was the National Weather Service would make a forecast in river stage. And many people had a hard time interpreting that and realizing what that meant in terms of their own personal flood risk or the flood risk for their community. So these maps serve as a translator of sorts for that information. So on the right-hand side here, if you move the slider up, it increases the flood stage and the corresponding river flow. And if you let go of it, then it displays the map that's related to that stage based upon our computer models. You can zoom in and out, find your own house. Over on the left-hand side, you can change the background map, and now you can look at individual buildings and get an impression during an event when the Weather Service is making a forecast, how that might impact you or your community. We also show annual chance probabilities. So this would be the 10% annual chance flood all the way up to the 10% annual chance flood. Or I'm sorry, the 100% annual, gosh, 100-year flood, or the 1% annual chance flood, or the 500-year, the 0.2% annual chance flood. For each one of these, you can also look at the water depth in any location. You turn on this radio button and click somewhere in the water, and it'll tell you how deep the water is going to be at that location. So again, not only looking at the flood boundary and whether the flood boundary is touching your community or your home, but you're able to look at the depth and get an impression of the magnitude of the damage that could be caused by this flood. We also have just this year, go back to this view, added the Mississippi River. So we're now showing flood inundation maps for the Mississippi River. I'll just look at pool 11. The data are organized a little bit differently because the Mississippi River is divided into navigation pools. It has, each one of these reaches has a dam on the downstream end and a dam on the upstream end. And so the slider controls the river flow, but we also display the water level and stage just upstream of the downstream lock and dam where this gauge is, and just downstream of the upstream lock and dam, because we realize that people, for instance, in Guttenberg are going to be looking at water levels near their community. And so we want to make sure both pieces of information are available to people. VTech also mentioned the statewide inundation maps. We have inundation maps everywhere in the state for areas draining greater than 1 square mile that we developed with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources and a few other partners. And it goes from the 50% annual chance flood all the way up to the 0.2% annual chance flood. So everywhere in Iowa, you have an opportunity to go out and look at your flood risk out into the future and make decisions about how to manage your property. While I'm on that topic, I just wanted to share the data is also displayed in a different format on our statewide floodplain mapping project site. Again, we developed this data set with close partnership with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. And this interface provides a little bit different view of the map. So it's predominantly the same information, but now the maps are presented in a way that you might be more familiar with if you work with FEMA. So I'll just pick one here. If you zoom in, the map should display my internet connection might not be good enough to do this very quickly. There we go. So we've got just the 100-year and the 500-year floodplain boundaries. For those of you that work with FEMA, we've got A zones as well as the AE zone information. Let's see if I can zoom into an AE community. Let's see, Lansing. That's an AE here. There you go. So you can see the crosshatched areas. We have an AE study 100-year and the 500-year in orange. And then along the Mississippi, we're showing the floodway that's been calculated for the Mississippi. So all that information is presented here in a more FEMA style format. However, these are not official FEMA maps. In most cases, the DNR is in the process of transitioning these maps over to the flood insurance program. And so about 75 counties, I think, are on in the queue to be adopted by FEMA. But this resource doesn't necessarily differentiate. So if you're interested in finding official information that's used by the flood insurance program, go directly to the FEMA site or to the Department of Natural Resources. There's one other view, and this is what we call flood risk management maps. And this essentially displays all of the maps. So the 2-year or the 50% chance annual flood, all the way to the 500-year 0.2% annual chance flood in one map. So let's see here, display issues. Again, the internet speeds are not great for me in my home, so I apologize if this doesn't work very well. What you should be seeing is a gradient close to the river. You'd see red, and it would transition to a dark blue as you got further away, showing the different flood probabilities. So you get an idea, there you go, you get an idea of where you have very high flood probabilities and where you have lower flood probabilities, so you can make better decisions about whether to plant, whether to put things into CRP, whether you have any sort of major flood risk to your structures on your property. And then we also have maps of scour-prone areas. One of our partners funded this analysis where we're looking at areas along the river that have a higher risk of scour as kind of an additional incentive to consider alternative land use practices to reduce loss associated with those high velocities on your property. So we'll go back to the IFAS platform. Again, there's no rainfall currently, but we do have rainfall data for all the current conditions. We have daily and cumulative rainfall, as VTech showed, for the past 2 weeks or so. And then we have the forecast information. So we have hourly forecasts. We can see if there's anything to see here. We zoom out. I'm running out of time, so I won't show much more, I promise. I'll just show you this last thing. My computer's giving me fits. So we can look at the forecast over the next several hours, and you can animate the Weather Service forecast there, and how we can see how that's going to impact Iowa. We can also look at the cumulative forecast over the next several hours, or look at the daily forecast over the next several days. There's a bunch of different nice tools that I didn't have a chance to share with you. Apologize, I've probably run too long and I've limited your opportunity for questions, but I'll stop here. Thank you for your time, and I encourage you to go out and play around with the Iowa Flood Information System, because I think there are a lot of really great tools there that can help you make decisions for your communities and your counties. So thank you.
We did have one question come through that just asked what you saw when the derecho was coming through Iowa.
That might be a good question for VTech as the meteorologist.
Well, there was not a lot of time to see much. We did check these wind sensors that Nate mentioned. We were concerned that they would be gone, but they survived. And so we did see some wind velocities in the neighborhood of 100 miles per hour. So
Thank you. If any other questions come up, please feel free to reach out to ISAC or the Iowa Flood Center directly. Again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our presenters, Vitek and Nathan, for their time and the valuable information they shared with us today. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.